Let's believe and pray. Mighty Fortress, we thank you for the gift of life that you've given unto us. As we delve into a very important unit, may you help us understand and retain that which we learn in our mind so that we can always use to help him who is seeking knowledge and who is weary and down-stricken with disease. My prayer, trusting and believing in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So, can somebody kindly just remind me what you guys were taught yesterday on nutrition? Elisha told me you stopped at facts. So, someone to kindly remind me. I want us to just do once again what we were taught yesterday, but in a more deeper and broader perspective, because this is the unit that will help you handle a lot of cases. Diabetes alone can be cured without using any medication um, if it is type 2 diabetes. It can be cured without using any drugs, any herbal medicine or the conventional medicine. Same to essential hypertension or primary hypertension can as well be cured just through diet or nutrition if done well and aggressively in 2 weeks. You should be able to reverse and totally cure someone with hypertension. And so this is a very important unit that we really need to deeply understand. This is one of the main objectives for this particular level of our training. As you guys have realized, we decided to divide the training into levels so that we can have sufficient time to cover such units as nutrition, anatomy, physiology, and pathology in detail. So nutrition, I believe you are told the definition for nutrition. So someone to kindly remind us again how we can define nutrition. Yes, Mary, your hand is raised. You can go ahead.
Good evening. Yeah,
Good
we looked at nutrition, where facilitator Elisha was able to define what nutrition was all about. That those were chemical compounds or substances that are found in food and blah blah, that they help us, the body, once taken in, they make the body function properly. Then where he measured in were there's 7 basic compounds of nutrition, which he mentioned as the carbs or the carbohydrates, the proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins, fiber, and water. Yeah, and then he gave us the importance of nutrition. Then he ventured now into explaining each of those 7 compounds, what they are and their functions in the body. Some even to what measurement should be taken, Yeah, so majorly that is what he took us through, each of those and their functions. I think that's what I can remember. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be using these particular slides, the slides that you used yesterday. But there are a few things that I've added to the slides. Not really few things, but there's one thing that I've added to the slide. So most of the things that I'll be saying, they're not in the slide because I want to believe that my counterpart at least covered most of the things that were in the slide. So my main agenda in going through the slides again is to cover what probably I think wasn't covered and is very important for us to know. And so one of the requirements that was mentioned for this course was that you should always have a notebook close to you to at least jot something down as the tutor speaks. So I want to define nutrition. I want to define nutrition. And nutrition, basically nutrition is science. When you look at the link, we are currently live in YouTube. When you look at the YouTube title for this video, I've titled it Nutrition Science. So nutrition is a branch of science. It's a branch of science that links food to health and disease. So that is nutrition. Nutrition is simply a branch of science. And what does that branch of science do? It links two things, health plus disease. It links the link between health plus disease. And so in our endeavors in studying nutrition, these are the two things, these are the main objective in whatever we'll be studying. If we'll be studying carbohydrate, we'll look at carbohydrates, yes, deeply, in-depthly, but we'll also see how carbohydrates affects our health. And we'll also see case studies of diseases. We will be doing this particular unit for a week. We've always done it for a week. If a week won't be enough, we'll add one more week to do this particular unit because we have to do it well and in-depthly. So that simply is nutrition. And nutrients are what Elisha taught you guys yesterday. Nutrients. Those are the food articles, the chemical articles in your food, from carbohydrates to proteins to fats and oils to minerals and vitamins. Those are nutrients. So nutrition is a branch of science that studies that. And so anything that involves or rotates around food can be described. Is everything that rotates and revolves around food is nutrition. That is from digestion to to the bowel movement, from digestion to bowel movement. Digestion, let me say ingestion, just putting food into your mouth, digesting the food, absorbing the food, transporting the food, excreting food substances. All that revolves around the science of nutrition. And so the nutrients that were mentioned, they come from the foods that we eat. The nutrients that were mentioned comes from the foods that we eat. So this is the part one of our training. It will be about 1 hour, 15 minutes. So what are some of the nutrients that Elisha mentioned? But before we get there, allow me read, allow us go through two verses. I normally believe and know, and I believe most of us do believe so, that God really is desirous of our well-being. God is really desirous of our well-being. The same way He is really desirous of our spiritual growth or our spiritual being. He is as well desirous of our well-being. And so when there okay, what am I even now trying to say? In the Bible, there are spiritual laws which really are calculated to help us in our spiritual growth. And since God is desirous in both aspects, I believe that He cannot only write or give to us spiritual laws, He has to give to us the laws of health that also helps us in our growth physically. Um, okay, this is sad. I don't have my Bible close to me. Just give me a minute. Okay, I have my Bible. So a verse that could be probably common to most of us. I'm turning to Exodus chapter 15. I'm turning my Bible to Exodus chapter 15, verse 26. In that particular verse, God introduces himself to us as a great healer. When you read the very last statement of that verse, I'll read, this is King James Version. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. That is what God tells us. He introduces himself to us as a healer. And in this verse, there's a promise that he gives. And he says, I will put none of these diseases upon thee. Those are lifestyle diseases. He tells the children of Israel, he gives them a promise of not allowing any disease to actually catch them. Allow me just to use that phrase. I'm not allowing any disease to catch them. And when you read the whole verse, you'll understand that that particular promise has a condition. And the condition goes, I'll read, and said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases. And so God says that if you will do that which is right, if you will do that which I command you to do, then there's no way I will allow lifestyle diseases or just diseases to introduces himself in that verse as a healer, and in several places he introduces we can learn that God is a healer. So he introduces himself to us as a healer. He gives us a promise of not allowing any disease to actually bring us down. And then he puts a condition to that particular promise. And so for the promise to be fully enjoyed by man, um, for the promise to be fully, let me just use the word fully enjoyed, for the promise to be fully enjoyed or enjoyed or felt by humanity, then we basically just have to obey his commandments. And the commandments that can help us stay away from sickness is mentioned by the same writer. He mentions the same thing in Exodus chapter 23, verse 25. The last verse we read, Exodus 23:25 says, And ye shall serve the Lord your God, and he shall bless thy bread and thy food and thy water. I'll read again. Exodus 23, verse 25 says, And ye shall serve the Lord your God. What does it mean to serve the Lord your God? What does it mean to serve the Lord your God? I believe you know what that means. And so when you serve the Lord your God, what will happen? God will bless thy bread and thy water. Serving God is just being obedient to his will, just obeying him primitively obeying God's commandments and wills, without questioning anything that appeals to your senses, without really feeling sorry for doing what is right. So it says, I'll read again, and ye shall serve the Lord your God, and he shall bless thy bread and thy water, and I will take sicknesses away from thee. And so for God to take sicknesses away from us, then he needs to bless food and water. There are blessings that God has bestowed in food and water for the remission for the remission of disease. The same way Christ's blood remits our sinful acts. There are blessings that God has bestowed in food and water that keeps us from becoming sick. And so nutrition is an important subject for us to discuss, because this is one of the ways, this is one of the ways God has designed diseases to be kept away from us. This is just a thumbnail that I placed on Google on YouTube. It really doesn't. So as I said yesterday, you talked about some nutrients, which I've said are chemical compounds or substances found in food that are used by the body to function properly and maintain health. They are found in food and water. They are found in food and water. So today I want us to deeply just talk about one for 2 hours. I just want us, not really 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes, to deeply just talk about one. I might talk a little bit fast, so we might even end in less than an hour. So I want us to talk about one today. So there are several things that we need in our diet. There are carbohydrates, there are proteins, there are fats, there are vitamins, there are fiber, and there are water. I'll just remove fiber. Fiber should be under carbohydrates. It should be under carbohydrates, but it's fine. But these are the 6 things that we really, the 7 things that we really need for our survival as the human race, and we'll know how in our as we discuss them one on one, So can I've talked about several things. Just a recap of what we've mentioned. Um, just a recap of what we've mentioned. We've defined nutrition. Number one, we've defined nutrition. What is nutrition? This is just a head knowledge. There's no way it will help you treat patient understanding what nutrition is, or rather just knowing the definition of nutrition. What will help you is understanding and knowing the exact principles that we'll talk about under nutrition. And we've seen, number two, that nutrients come from food. I'll send you some videos to watch on GMOs. Which will really help us become serious in trying to yield our own foods. So we've talked about nutrients come from food, and someone to kindly remind me. I might say this and then forget to send it because of a lot of work. So if I don't send it in 24 hours, kindly just you'll do well to remind me. So nutrients come from food. That's the second thing that we've seen, and we've seen these different types of nutrients. And so there are those nutrients that are normally considered essential. There are those that are normally considered essential, like you have to take them in your diet because they're really not produced or rather manufactured in the body. Things like cholesterol. It is a nutrient, yes, but 70% of it is manufactured by the liver, and the 70% is actually all that you need, so it is not essential. Whether you do not take a dietary source of cholesterol or take it, there'll be no problem. Taking a dietary source of cholesterol would depend on the nature of that cholesterol. But we'll see that deeply. And then thirdly and lastly, what we've discussed before we move on is why we should study nutrition. Why we should study nutrition. And here I'll just pose to us a question, probably to just know our understanding. Why study nutrition? I hope that's the spelling. Why study nutrition? So this one we've talked about. As I was talking, I mentioned. So I just want to know how many of us were keen. You can kindly just unmute and say an answer. Why should we study nutrition? Because from the first two things, what is nutrition? Nutrients come from food. When we were mentioning the first two, we saw the reasons why we should study nutrition. Yes, nutritionist Masnet Kerubu. Masnet, by the way, is a nutritionist. Go ahead, Masnet.
Okay, we study nutrients. The importance of nutrition is to enable our bodies to be healthy. To the nutrients that we take in helps to build our bodies, so that it can prevent the body from getting diseases.
Okay, thank you. So two statements. Number one, we know that nutrition is more or less a lifestyle factor that majorly is very key in it is very key in our development, that is in child development and even our development and optimal in our optimal health. Nutrition, the foods and everything, they're very key number one in development. When we'll be talking about fats, we'll talk about the brain and we'll see what we mean by development. And then some other thing is optimal health. So nutrition is very key for these two things. And so when we understand what nutrition is, we can easily provide our body with the best food that it needs to be in the best health possible and for us to develop in the best way desired, so that we cannot be health reformers who are emaciated and weak, so that we cannot be reformers who are always sickling. And one of the things that makes reformers very sick is avoiding the usage of fat in their food, avoiding fats to cook. You should always cook with fats, but the question is what kind of fats. So there are certain chronic and life-threatening diseases that can really come to us. An example is cardiovascular or heart diseases, or probably hypertension, cancer, diabetes. Actually, today, by just understanding carbohydrate in-depthly, you'll be able to treat a cancer patient in 2-3 months. Just from understanding nutrition alone, you can be able to take care of a cancer patient at home just by diet. Most cancer patients that normally just given painkillers after their chemo and radios. So why should we study nutrition? That's the main reason. So we won't really focus more on that. And we saw this in Genesis in two verses, Exodus chapter 19:26 and Exodus chapter 23 verse 25. So we'll proceed to other things. Let's proceed. I never wanted to take time rubbing the writings. That's why I did that. So We've talked, I've recapped this, I've recapped all this. So how important is nutrition? Good nutrition is the key to good mental and physical health. Mental, as I said, development, physical health, what I said, optimal health. And so eating a balanced diet is an important part of a good health for everyone. The kind and amount of food you eat affects the way you feel and how your body works. And in this particular verse here, 3 John 1, verse 1 to 2, you'll understand how God is really desirous of our prosperity in health and also spiritually. I won't take a lot of time here because those are things that you guys discussed. So it is important that everyone consumes these 7 nutrients on a daily basis to help them build their bodies and maintain their health. So this one we'll discuss later. These ones here we'll discuss later. These ones we'll discuss later. So let me get back to this slide, the empty slide, so that we can now talk about carbohydrates. So we've seen 7 things. So let's begin with carbohydrates. You guys talked about carbohydrates yesterday. Can somebody define to us what carbohydrates are? Somebody to kindly define carbohydrates. Yes, Naomi. Go ahead.
These are foods which give energy. They are energy giving foods.
Thank you, thank you. That's a very important thing to note. That's a very important thing to note. So carbohydrates are energy giving foods. But then when we look at the seven nutrients that we mentioned, you'll find that proteins also they they give energy, but mostly proteins are reserved for other key processes in our body, but they can give energy when the body is in dire need. The other thing that gives energy, actually, fats and oils, they have more calories, and you know our energy mostly come from calories. Fats and oils have more calories than carbohydrates. But the major energy giving food is carbohydrates. So I want that to be clear. Carbohydrates, fats and oils and proteins, they can be used for fuel in the body. They can be used for energy in the body. But the first resort normally is carbohydrate. And then fats and oils, and then protein when the body is in dire need and you've not taken carbohydrates for a very long time. So our most important source of energy. This is our most important source of energy, carbohydrates. And in our treatment, in cancer treatments, we'll always advise our patients not to take carbohydrates for some 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, not to take carbohydrates at all for 6 to 8 weeks. We'll understand why when we'll be talking about carbohydrates and diseases, not in this class, probably tomorrow. Our most important source of energy. Our most important source of energy, or it fuels our body. The most important source of fuel of the body. That's the first thing. The keyword here, most important. And mainly carbohydrates, it's used to fuel. So these are things that are not in the slide. They're not in the slides. Mostly carbohydrates, they are normally used to fuel the brain system, the brain functions, nervous function, and the red blood cells. Let me write nervous system and red blood cells. Red blood cells. Very, very important. Very, very important point to note. And so there's some other thing. Carbohydrates, it's normally available to our cells in different forms. It's normally available to our cells in different forms. And that is in blood glucose or glycogen. In blood glucose or glycogen. So to the cells, I believe you know what cells are. Cells are the smallest living organisms in your body, and they're responsible for a lot of functions in the body. And so cells use carbohydrates to make their food. That's what we are normally told. That's how it's normally said. Cells normally use carbohydrates to produce energy, or to make their food or to fuel them. That's why I said that the brain cells, mostly the brain cells, the nervous cells, and the red blood cells, they majorly use carbohydrates to fuel their function. And so we really need them. The other thing, what was I saying? Yeah, it's normally available, that is carbohydrates, to our cells in two different ways. That is blood, in form of blood glucose, that is the carbohydrate in your blood. Normally it's called blood glucose. And then the one in your muscles and liver is called glycogen. And glycogen is just a combination or a link of many glucose just attached and or probably just combined together. These are things that you should note because they'll really help you in your prescriptions. So those are the basics of carbohydrates. So allow me ask you guys a question. Why is carbohydrate considered our most valuable energy source? So before we move to every next step, there'll always be a question to ask, just to just help us ponder on what has been discussed, and also just to note our understanding. Why are carbohydrates considered most valuable energy source? I want us to get to the types of carbohydrates. Yes, Mary.
I think the once ingested, we know they are digested in the mouth. So once they get to the body, they are easily converted into sugar and therefore readily available to help the body. That is mentally or any part of the body. I think that is why they are vital. Unlike fats, maybe they may take a process to be converted. Yeah, that's my guess.
Beautiful response. Asnet? You can, Asnet, you can unmute and give a response if your response is probably different from Mary's.
Yes, I think the end product of carbohydrates is glucose, which is directly absorbed to the bloodstream to give immediate energy.
More beautiful. Julia, your hand was also raised. You can unmute and speak.
Just to add on what they've said, it also fuels the brain function, nervous system function, and red blood cells function. That is why it is the major source of energy.
Beautiful. Okay, so why is carbs considered most valuable energy source? Yeah, so when they're broken down into simple chemicals, the simplest chemical normally it's an energy source, or it provides the body with some. It is used to fuel. What Mary, Julia, and Asnet just said. But in a brief, in short, the main reason why they're considered the most valuable energy source is because when broken down, when metabolized into simpler compounds, the resultant chemicals normally energy giving chemicals. Unlike probably proteins, which would give you other things, and fats and oils, which would give other things. So this one here was a question that we were to apply from what we've discussed and what we'll discuss as well as we proceed. So that is beautiful. So we can proceed to the forms of carbohydrates, or types of carbohydrates. This is where diabetes will come in. Why you should give diabetic patients very low carbs, very low carb food, carbohydrate foods. So you need to understand the next point, that is the types of carbohydrates. Though we'll talk about diseases tomorrow, the diseases that we can talk about under carbohydrates, we'll talk about them tomorrow. Today is to just lay a foundation. Today's session is to just lay a foundation as we proceed. So we have two different types or forms of carbohydrates. And probably just so that you do not be confused, the first thing I said, carbohydrates can be available in different forms to the cells, two different forms to the cells. Like their availability, the forms they are available to the cells. Forms here simply, it means nature. So when we use forms under the types of carbohydrates, it's not the same thing as the availability that we talked about, though the word is the same. Let me just use types. So we have two types of carbohydrates. I really don't know how to spell a lot of things nowadays. So we have two types of carbohydrates. Were you guys taught about the types of carbohydrates yesterday? If you were taught, you can kindly help me. You can mention them. The first type of carbohydrate. Or you guys were not taught. I've not looked at the slides well. So we have simple carbohydrates, simple carbs, and we'll be able to define and know what simple carbohydrates are. Simple carbohydrates should not be taken at all by diabetic patients. Number 2, we have complex. Complex carbohydrates. Complex and simple carbohydrates. Complex and simple carbohydrate. I'm just trying to take a quick screenshot of the attendance. So simple and complex carbs. What are simple carbs? What are simple carbs? So simple carbohydrates, commonly they are known as sugars. They're known as sugars, and actually the end result of carbohydrate metabolism is normally a simple sugar or a simple carb or a sugar, or rather glucose. Let me just say glucose. Sugar, when used under the field nutrition, it means glucose. Sugar means glucose. And this can be found simply under the simple carbs or in a complex form through bonds in chemical carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates, as I've said, they are commonly they're known as sugars, and they normally contain two sugar units combined together, or one. They commonly contain two sugar units or one. This is what I mean. We have two types of simple carbohydrates. So allow me rub the complex. We have two types of simple carbohydrates. Number one is mono. Mono here would mean one, monosaccharide. One glucose. That is what it means. Number two is disaccharide, which simply means two glucose combined by chemical bonds together. So these are the two simple carbs that we have. I'll send you guys some notes by Light, notes on nutrition by Light. I believe you know Light. Light is Lay Institute of Global Health Training, a branch of Wildwood. If you probably have heard of Wildwood, it's the African branch of Wildwood. So simple carbs, here we have monosaccharides and disaccharides. And monosaccharides are just simple. There's no bond in these sugars. The first sugar is just one sugar. Disaccharides are two sugars or two sugars. Let me just use the word sugars. Two sugars combined together. So monosaccharides is the most basic unit for carbohydrates. All carbohydrate structures from simple to complex. And so the most common examples of monosaccharides that probably you might know is fructose. I believe you know fructose. Fructose, commonly it's normally called fruit sugar. Fructose are normally found in your fruits. When you eat fruits they're normally sweet. Sindio? Yeah. They're normally sweet. They're normally sweet because they have sugars. Actually, in the world, most people are actually woke out here, and they know that if a patient has cancer, they should not take sugar. But then the understanding of sugar normally is not complete. They normally think sugar is the table sugar that is normally used to sweeten tea, not knowing that sugar is found from things as simple as fruits that can really feed that cancerous cell to grow. That can feed the cancerous cells to grow. So monosaccharides One of the examples of monosaccharide is fruits, the sugar that is found in fruits. And that sugar, I'll repeat because probably some of us are hearing these things for the first time. So I'm mentioning things like fruits. Those are the things that you should know. You should not really suffer yourself to know a lot of, really know these terms. But knowing these terms would actually even be beneficial if you are probably to sit somewhere with a doctor and discuss about the treatment of a patient, or discuss about just health in general. You'll have a bit of some bravery, so to speak, to engage in a dialogue with them. So let me write so that I do not talk a lot and say things that are nonsensical. Fructose. And fructose, as I have said, it is not really, it is fruit sugar. Fruit sugar. If you're not seeing the writings, you can probably just increase the size of your the slide on your screen. Just increase the size of the slide on your screen. So fructose, this what I've written here is fruit sugar. So all fruits, they fall under simple carbohydrates. All fruits have simple carbohydrates in them. All fruits that are sweet. All fruits that are sweet. The carbohydrate is called fructose. So let's talk about fructose. Fructose normally, it is directly absorbed in the small intestines and taken to the liver. And when it is taken to the liver, normally it's further metabolized into glucose. So fructose can easily be metabolized into glucose in the liver. No, I want you to note that it is glucose that interferes with blood sugar levels. It is glucose that interferes with cancers. It is glucose that affects cancers, feeds cancers, and not fructose. But the fructose will be absorbed readily. It won't actually be digested. This sugar that is in your fruit, it won't be digested. It will just be moved from your mouth all the way to the small intestines, and then directly just be absorbed. But then it will be metabolized or converted into glucose in your liver. And what happens when you probably take excess, if there is excess of that? When there is excess of the glucose, some of it normally is transferred or converted into fats. Some of it is normally converted into fats. Excess of glucose normally is converted into fats or other compounds, any compounds like glycogen. Yeah. But when talking about lipids, we'll see more about that. So the second type of monosaccharide is, monosaccharide, it is the simplest. It is just, it is not metabolized, it is not broken down in any way. It is directly absorbed into the bloodstream, the hepatic system. So number one, we've said under monosaccharide, you guys can do better notes than mine under monosaccharide, because you have very big space. For me, I only have one screen to write on. So fructose. Number two, do not be confused by my writing. Number two, should I talk about galactose first? Let me say galactose. Galactose is also another monosaccharide, another basic sugar that is not digested. And galactose, mostly galactose is normally found. It's normally found. It's normally not found this simply. Like, you won't find it free in any nutrient or food article or in your diet, you'll always find it attached to glucose. You'll always find it attached to glucose. An example in glucose and lactose. Lactose is a disaccharide. It is it is a disaccharide. Disaccharide, di means two sugars. So when I say disaccharide, lactose is a disaccharide. What I simply mean, it is a combination of two sugars. So lactose is a disaccharide. Lactose is a combination of two different sugars that is found in milk. So this is what I mean. Lactose is the sugar in milk. So when the sugar in milk is combined with glucose, which is a monosaccharide, then when it is broken down, one of the component that is arrived to normally is galactose. So you can always find galactose from metabolism of lactose in your milk. Number 3, we'll be able to understand these things as we move either way, but try as hard as you can to understand them right now. So glucose. The third is glucose. We could have mentioned glucose as the first. So glucose can be referred to as blood sugar. It can be referred to as dextrose. Let me just type it. Dextrose. You'll find in some products it's written dextrose. In our body, it's found as, and in the blood it is called blood glucose. It can be called blood glucose. So most of it, normally the glucose, most of it comes from the digestion of starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate. We'll be able to see that starch is a complex carbohydrate. An example is your potato. The potatoes that you take or the cassavas that you take, when it is broken down into the simplest compound, the starch in it, it turns to glucose. Or aside from starch is sucrose. Sucrose is a disaccharide, a combination of two sugars. Sucrose is it's a combination of two sugars, and sucrose is what you have as your common table salt. Not really salt, but sugar, the one that you use to sweeten your tea. It's called sucrose, and majorly it is found in your maple syrup. You'll find it in maple syrup. If you know what maple syrup is, you'll always find it in honey. Sucrose, you'll always find it in honey. You'll always find it in your cane juice. You'll always find it in your cane juice. So that is what is sucrose. Sucrose is the sugar that is in honey. So honey is a simple sugar. The sugar that is in honey, your cane juice, your high corn syrup, probably high corn syrup. Okay, it can't. Probably there are those of us who have never heard of it, but it's definitely in Kenya. You can find it in a supermarket. It's used as a sweetener mostly. So those are monosaccharides. I could have confused someone. So allow me just to go through it a bit quick. So we've said that we have two types of carbohydrates, that is simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. When we talk about simple carbohydrates can either, we've said carbohydrates are sugars, right? So simple carbohydrates can either be a two bonded sugar, two sugars that are attached to each other, or just one single sugar that is not attached to some other to anything. And we've said that the single sugars that are not attached are called monosaccharide. You don't really have to know all that. The terms, you don't have to struggle or yeah, to know the terms, just to know the exact things. So if just to know the fructose, or rather the fruits under fructose, galactose there, just to know milk, the glucose that we mentioned, just to know the high corn syrup, just to know the starches that we've mentioned that can be broken down to glucose. And those are the very important things that you need to know. But if you grasp everything, it would be better. It would be better. Very, 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 very essential as we move forward. So disaccharides are two sugars that are attached to each other, or two bonded sugars, disaccharides. And mostly, oh, there is something that I didn't mention that is very essential. Under 3, the glucose, actually, the high corn syrup, you can find it in all soft drinks. You'll find it in candies, you'll find it in jams, you'll find it in jellies, you'll find it in jams. You see, the icon, the glucose. These are very bad things that should not be used in the body. Simple sugars should not be used in excess. Actually, even the Bible itself says that honey in itself, it is good, but when it is used in excess, it might cause a bit of some puking. It might cause some problems to you. So there are certain things that should not be used completely. There are certain things that should be used to a minimum. To a minimum. Fruits are good. Fructose is okay. It is good, but it should be used, because you've seen when it is in excess, it is stored into fat and other things, and so you'll become fat and such things, simply because you are eating a lot of sugary foods. But what normally makes us fat a lot are fats and oils, not even carbohydrates. It's fats and oils, because there's a lot of calorie in fats compared to there are a lot of calories in fats compared to carbohydrates. Yes, Julia.
I You said that all fruits that are sweet have simple carbohydrates. Can you give us examples of those fruits?
I said that.
You said that all fruits that are sweet have simple carbohydrates, are monosaccharides, have fructose. Oh, can
All
you give us, yes,
They have fructose, yes, that's true. Can I give you?
examples of those fruits?
The fruits that are sweet, all sweet fruits have fructose. That's the carbohydrate that they have, from bananas to apples to any fruit that is sweet to the mouth, any fruit that is sweet to the taste. It has fructose. And this knowledge will help you in your management for metabolic disorders, like chronic metabolic disorders like cancers, um, diabetes, some heart problems that we'll mention, and we'll look deeply into it. So if there is something that is not making sense to you right now, or probably if there is something that is not adding up, not really making sense, I'm really trying hard to make sense. So I don't want to say I'm not making sense. So if there's something that probably is not adding up, they'll definitely add up as we conclude our lesson on carbohydrates. Like when we'll be doing now the application of the theory that we are learning here, when we'll now be doing the practical application of the theory we are learning, we'll be able to see. So any fruit that is sweet to the mouth has fructose. Fruits like probably the citrus fruits, they have minimum. Fruits like avocado, very minimum. So for such fruits that are not really sweet to the taste, they can always be used by diabetic patients. They can always be used freely by your cancer patients and the rest. but that we'll mention. So let's proceed. I believe that was I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
So disaccharides are simply a combination of two monosaccharides, a combination of two monosaccharides, and one of the disaccharide is sucrose, as we saw. And sucrose, I believe you remember a sucrose that we mentioned, the common sugar that we add to our teas. I believe probably there's most of us are not using it. It is poison. So we've said that disaccharide is a combination of two monosaccharide, and sucrose is a disaccharide. What monosaccharides combine to make sucrose? What monosaccharides? Glucose and fructose. Glucose plus fructose will make sucrose. So when sucrose is metabolized or synthesized, it will break into one glucose and one fructose. One glucose and one fructose. Yeah, so that is the sugar that we add to our tea. And let me mention examples of sucrose, the table sugar. Do you know maple syrup? Maple syrup. I believe table sugar. Yeah. Table sugar is a sucrose. So when they are metabolized, they're broken down into glucose and some fructose. Oh no. We have table sugar. We have honey. Under this one, we have sugar beets. The sugary beetroot. So these ones normally they're processed. Mostly, I didn't include cane sugar. I mentioned them earlier, cane sugar. So these ones normally they're processed, varying depending on degree. They're normally further processed into brown sugar, white sugar, and powdered sugar. They can be processed into such brown, white, or powdery sugar. So do not be deceived by the brown color of sugar. It is still a very simple sugar that is very harmful to your cells. Very harmful to your cells. But when you eat them in the natural way they are, an example is your sugar cane, the cane sugar, your sugar cane, when you eat it the way it is, then it is okay. Just allow and let the body digest or metabolize it or break it down into its simplest form. That's okay. But for given conditions, we will not be allowing that. We will not be allowing that. So that is it with simple sugars. Those are all the examples of simple sugars. And as I said, simple sugars should not be taken by diabetic patients. You should not even minimize. They should not take them at all until they get well. So that is what you'll do with the information on simple sugars. Diabetic patients, no. Simple sugars increase triglyceride levels. Triglyceride is a type of fat in your blood. And you know when you have hypertension, triglyceride, they normally harden arteries. When you have essential hypertension, it would mean that your arteries are hard, or your blood is thick, or probably there's just some problem with the nervous system. So we do not recommend simple sugars for diabetic patients, for hypertensive patients, because it worsens, so it hardens more the arteries. It thins, it thickens also the blood. Those are the things that you need to know about simple sugars, but we'll study them and see them more. Let's continue. Let's continue. I'll rub what I've written here. So we've talked about simple sugars. So I want us to move to something else. That is the complex sugars, the second type of carbohydrate. So the second type of carbohydrate is complex sugars. Complex sugars. So complex sugars, there are different types. If we were talking about advanced nutrition, we could have talked of oligosaccharides, which is a combination of 3 to about 10 different sugars. We saw that mono is 1 sugar, di is 2. So oligosaccharide is 3 to 10. And then the other type of a complex sugar is polysaccharide. Polysaccharide is, I believe, more than 10. More than 10. If I'm wrong, ASNet will correct me. It should be more than 10 or more than 1,000, but it should be more than 10. So polysaccharide. And mostly polysaccharides are commonly called complex sugars. The polysaccharides are the ones normally majorly called complex sugars or starches. So we can call these ones starches or complex sugar. Complex sugar. This one you really do not need to know at this point. So I want us to continue. I want us to continue, but before we continue, allow me ask you a question as I get some water. So the question is, what happens to disaccharides when they are digested and absorbed? What happens to disaccharides? Let's begin. Let me just give a specific example. Not really. Okay, let me give a specific example. Where have I placed my pen? Okay, what happens to monosaccharides and disaccharides when they are digested and absorbed into the blood? What happens to them? The monosaccharides that we've mentioned and disaccharides. That is from your, as I said, just know that monosaccharides, that is your fruits, monosaccharides, the other source of monosaccharide, okay, yeah, your fruits, and then disaccharide would be your sugar cane, your probably the common table sugar. So what happens to the things that we mentioned, the food items that we mentioned under mono and disaccharides when they are digested and absorbed? Somebody to kindly reply as I get some water. Anyone who wants to give it a try? Anyone who wants to give it a try? It's just what we've learned. An example, when you eat your fruit, the fruit is fructose, we said. When you eat it, we said that it is absorbed in the small intestines directly into the blood. And that is in the hepatic system, where it is transported all the way into the liver. And in the liver, it is further metabolized or synthesized into glucose, which some part of it is turned into other compounds if it is in excess. An example is fat, the blood fat. Some other part of it is turned. That's why we said simple sugars, when taken in excess, the triglyceride levels rise. There are fats that rise in the blood. The blood becomes thin. So some of it is as well turned into glucose. Another example would be when you eat your potato. Potato largely it is starch, and you've said starch commonly it is broken down. The simplest form is some carbohydrates, not really carbohydrates but glucose. Yes, glucose, and the glucose is taken into the blood, and that's the simplest form of a carbohydrate, so it cannot be metabolized or just changed into another form unless it is to be stored. So the glucose is stored when it is in excess. It is stored in muscles, and some of it is stored in the liver. It is stored in form of glycogen, and the glucose that is stored in the liver, mostly it is the glucose. When blood sugar levels get low, it is normally broken down into glucose to give energy to the cells, to other cells. But the one that is stored in the muscles, normally it is used during physical activity, during intense physical activity. So that was the answer. That was the answer. Yes. So we'll continue. I see most of us have dropped. Most of us have left. So we were talking about complex sugars. And as I was saying, complex sugars, they are just a bond of 3 sugars and more. If they're 3 to 10, you'd call them oligosaccharides. If they're more than 10 to probably 1,000, you'd call them polysaccharides. You'd call them polysaccharides. So what are the sources? What are the sources of all this? What are the sources of complex sugars? This is where we'll be talking about refining food. What are the sources? What are the sources? This one we mentioned in our yesterday's class. Somebody to kindly tell us, what are the sources? Somebody to tell us the sources of complex sugars. It was discussed. I've used these slides before. So sources of sugars were mentioned. Somebody to kindly tell us sources of complex sugars. Or complex carbohydrates. Okay, no one wants to try. It's fine. So I'll just mention them. We have vegetables. We have vegetables. You might wonder, vegetables, is it really true? Yeah, there are complex sugars. or complex carbohydrates in vegetables. We have them in grains, and we have them in fruits. Grains here would be your legumes, your nuts, and your seeds. Yeah, that's those are grains. Your legumes, your nuts, and your seeds. So those are the sources of complex carbohydrates when they are uninterfered with. So fruits, they have both complex and simple carbohydrates, and so they're very beneficial when eaten because they'll supply both. So this is it. I want us to go a step further. How can we now transition from here? So these ones here are the chief sources of complex carbohydrates. Okay, yeah. Let me see. So these are plant sources. These are plant sources. But we can also find carbohydrates in animals. Carbohydrates are also stored in animals, the same way they're stored in the human beings, but they normally start going bad immediately the animal dies. So the carbohydrate in animals, they really do not help us at all. They're not beneficial. So you really need to take fruits, vegetables, grains, and fruits if probably you're still struggling to take meat. Meat is not really food. Meat is not food, so it shouldn't be eaten at all. But either way, so vegetables, grains, and fruits. So in plants, these particular complex carbohydrates, they're normally stored in two different forms. So this is what I mean. This one here now it will start becoming interesting. So carbohydrates, the complex, are normally stored in two different forms by the plant. Some two technical words, amylose, then really not technical. Amylose, technical, amylose and amylopectin. Amylose and amylopectin. These are the two different forms in which the complex sugars normally are stored in the plant. So the complex sugars can be grouped in two forms, or the polysaccharides can be grouped in two forms. That is amylose and amylopectin. And as we said, polysaccharides, they're normally just bonds of monosaccharides, or even disaccharides. So amylose is normally just a chain of bonds. It's normally just a chain of bonds, a long chain of bonds. That is amylose. Sugar, just bonding in one long chain. But for amylopectin, it's normally just a branched chain. It's a branched chain, what I'm currently drawing, a branched chain. So it is not one long chain, but it is branched chains. And when complex sugars are normally digested, the bacteria in our stomach, they normally begin digesting from the glucose from these ends. And so you'll realize, since amylopectin have different particular ends, it means that they are normally readily digested They are normally readily digested very fast, and they normally provide a lot of glucose in the blood. They normally end up providing a lot of glucose or sugar in the blood, as compared to amylose. Amylose is just one, these two ends alone, because they have to be digested or metabolized or broken down only from the ends. So they're broken down very slowly but surely. For this one, they're broken down very fast and they end up providing a lot of sugar in the diet. So amylopectin, examples of amylopectin foods, actually in our diet, almost 80% of what we eat is amylopectin. So mostly, these are normally found in root vegetables, the amylopectin, such as potatoes. They're really, their glycemic index is very high. That is the sugar forming ability in the blood. We have yams under amylopectin. We have things like cassava. So your root vegetables, the sweet root vegetables, they are the amylopectin. The branched thing that we've drawn here, the branched one, amylopectin. But for amylose, these are like your beans and some other grains. Yeah, so they're normally broken very slowly, and the sugar that comes or that is formed after its digestion or breaking down normally is not that high. So I believe you've understood that. But there are other complex carbohydrates. There are other ways in which the plant normally store carbohydrates aside from these two ways, of which in form of fiber. So the other thing is fiber. Fiber is also a complex sugar. So the beauty with fiber, we have different form of fiber. So these are starches, the two forms, these are starches that we've mentioned. So we have starches and then we have fiber. So starches, they're normally absorbable, but for fiber, like they're digestible, but for fiber, they are indigestible. They cannot be broken down by the bacteria in your stomach or any chemical. They cannot be broken down. But there are some that can be absorbed whole as they are. They cannot be broken down, but they can be absorbed into the bloodstream. And the ones that are normally absorbed into the bloodstream, they're normally responsible for very many functions, as we'll see. So let's see. I believe you guys have understood what I've written here. So I'll just rub everything and then get back to talk about fiber, because fiber is also very, very important for our clinical understanding of nutrition. So fiber here, we said that there are two different types. There are digestible and indigestible. Digestible and indigestible. Those are the two types of fiber. But you'll find that fiber is just a group of substances with similar characteristics. It is not just one thing. It is a group of substances that have similar characteristics. So what is fiber? A group of substances with similar characteristics. That is what fiber is. And what are these substances? There are 6 major substances. Number 1 is cellulose. I believe that you've always heard of cellulose in vegetables. It is a type of fiber. Cellulose, normally it's found in vegetables, the raw vegetables. That's why it's normally important to steam your vegetables so that the cellulose can be broken so that you can enjoy the carbohydrates or the sugars that are enclosed in the cellulose. Number 2, we have hemicellulose, hemicellulose. Hemicelluloses. Hemicelluloses. That is the second one. And then 3 is pectins. Pectins you'll largely find. Okay, we'll talk about where you can find them. So let me just write pectins. Number 4 is gums. So these are examples of fibers that I'm mentioning, and they'll help us understand indigestible and digestible and the different functions of fiber. Number 5 is mucus. These are very important in maintaining the integrity of the stomach. If you have ulcers, I normally tell my ulcers patients that they should not be taking white rice, they should take brown rice. At least it helps in their treatment. It helps treat them faster. And then we have lignin. But lignin is not a carbohydrate. It's a non-carbohydrate fiber. Non-carbohydrate fiber. These particular 5, the first 5, these are the carbohydrate fibers. Carbohydrate fibers. And then the first 3, cellulose, hemuloses, and pectins, these first 3, they are insoluble. They do not dissolve. They do not dissolve. And they normally just form the structure. They give the plant its structure. So they do not dissolve. They cannot be interfered with by anything unless the food is eaten. So they normally, their main function, an example is hemulose. Normally it's found in the outer coating of every grain, that is the bran. The seeds are normally in 3 parts. We have the first part, the outer part is endosperm. An example, if you look at wheat, what normally gives wheat its brown color is the bran, not endosperm. But we have bran, we have endosperm, and then we have germ. We have germ. So mostly, the hemicellulose, it's normally found in the bran. So when you process wheat, you'll be doing away with hemicellulose, this particular fiber. That is why it's normally said that wheat or the white wheat flour is normally deprived of fiber. The fiber that is normally moved mostly is the hemicellulose and pectin. If it is a food product that has pectin. So most of them, the cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectins, most of them are normally insoluble. They do not dissolve in water and they do not ferment at all. They do not dissolve in water and they do not ferment at all. So they normally help in bowel movement. They are normally laxatives because of their inability to dissolve. They normally quicken bowel movements. They normally act as laxatives. And so it is very important for us to take whole wheat flour or to take our seeds or the grains when they are still whole, when there's nothing that has been removed from it, so that food do not take a very long time in our stomach. Those are one of the recommendations that you'll give to your hypertensive patients. Foods should be whole. They should be in complex forms. They should not be digested. We'll see that further. We'll see that further. So yes, I believe there is no one getting confused. So the 3 I said, most of them are insoluble and they just act as laxatives. Those are substances that helps in transit. That is the time in which food takes in the gut, the gastrointestinal system. They really help food not to take a long time in the gut. Meat and flesh foods, they normally take a lot of time in your gut because they do not have the necessary fibers, the insoluble fibers that are needed to get them out there. So the sources of such insoluble fibers would be, or the sources of these three things would be some vegetables, nuts, your fruit, the skin of your fruits. An example, pectin, normally it is highly found in apples. And there are different types of fibers. By the way, you can group fibers into two. You can group them under dietary fiber, or I believe nutritional fiber. I'm really not sure. But there are fibers that have been extracted from their natural form. An example, pectin extracted from apple so that it is used as an expectorant. Pectin can be not really expectorant but laxative, something to help purge waste from your colon outside. So fibers can be extracted. They are beneficial when taken whole and when the extracts are also from a trustworthy company. So what am I saying in short? The sources of these insoluble fibers, you'll find them from your wheat bran, from your wheat when it is whole, from whole nuts, from fruits, whole fruits, and from some vegetables. So it is essential for us to take these things for just some regular bowel movements. And then for things like for gums and mucilages, they're normally contained around the plant cells, and then pectins also, they're normally contained around the plant cells within. So if this is a cell, you'll always find gums around or within the cell. That is the gums, mucilages, and pectins. So mostly they're normally dissolved in water. They can either be dissolved in water or they absorb water. And that is the class where cilia masks fall. It is a bulk laxative, where cilia masks is a type of fiber. You can actually use cilia mask to bake, because baking powder is really not healthy. So cilia mask is normally a better alternative to baking powder, or even nutritional yeast or just yeast. Yeah, it's normally good. But when you bake with yeast, you should bake your food well and just let it stay for 24 hours before you eat it. This is it. What was I saying? Yeah, soluble. They can either be soluble, that is your gums, your mucilages and pectins. They can be soluble or insoluble. No, not really. They can be dissolved in water. They can be soluble in water, or they absorb water, making them bulk laxatives. So they can easily ferment actually. And when they ferment, what they'll really do, they'll maintain the normal balance in the gut bacteria. They'll really help in the health of the gut bacteria. And the gut bacteria, its health of the gut bacteria is related to your immunity. So you really need these foods in whole for strong immunity system, because they'll feed the bacteria, and the bacteria in your digestive system, the good and the bad, that hence maintaining the health there. And when the health there is maintained, your immunity is maintained, your brain functions will be well. So you should always eat your foods with as whole as possible, with their fibers intact. So what are some of the functions of these soluble fibers? We've seen the functions of insoluble. And so what are the functions of soluble fibers? Since they're soluble, they get into the bloodstream, right? So they control blood glucose levels. An example is lignin, which, they control blood glucose levels, and then they reduce blood cholesterol. An example is lignin, that binds the bad cholesterols. It binds the bad cholesterols and hence reduces its levels in the blood. And then Yeah, those are the two main functions of all that. So let's do a recap. So carbohydrates, these are food that energize the body. Carbohydrates are your body's main sources of energy, and we saw that. And mainly they fuel your brain, your nervous system, and what else did we mention? Your brain, your nervous system, and the red blood cells. So we saw that there are different types of carbohydrates. There are simple carbohydrates, there are complex carbohydrates. We saw the examples of simple carbohydrates. We saw examples of complex carbohydrate, which fiber is one of them. And we've seen that fiber is a carbohydrate that aids in digestion, helps you feel full, and keeps the blood cholesterol levels in check. So now you know how the types of fibers that keep the blood cholesterol levels in check. Those are soluble fibers, and that would be lignin. Lignin would really help in that. And we saw that it aids digestion. It aids digestion how? Which type of fibers aids in digestion? Insoluble fiber. Why? Because they are natural laxative. They decrease the transit time, the time in which food takes in your colon or in your intestines, so to speak. So I know the slides on carbohydrates here, there were only two, but we've been able to expand and know more because we want to study them deeply, so that at least when you even end the training, when someone asks you a question, we'll be able to answer. So in our next class, we'll continue with our maze on carbohydrates, and we'll talk about carbohydrate foods. That's the next thing that we'll talk about. We'll talk about carbohydrates foods. Here we'll talk about whole products, whole grains. We'll talk about vegetables, and then we'll talk about alternative sweeteners. Alternative sweeteners. What can you use to sweeten your food? What can you use to sweeten your tea? Alternative sweeteners. And probably this is what we might be able to study tomorrow. And lastly, we'll be able to see some case studies of how you can use, like we use a case to catch up approach of carbohydrates and disease, carbohydrates and health, where we look at milk, lactose intolerance, we look at different chronic diseases. Hopefully we'll do that tomorrow. So thank you for joining today's class. Is there any question before we close with the word of prayer? Is there any question? Anyone with a question? Anyone with a question? So there's no question. Okay, that's fine. So in level 1 of training, nutrition should be done, will be done in-depthly. Diseases, its causes, its origin, will be done in-depthly. Anatomy, that is the body, the functioning of your anatomy and physiology, the functioning of the body organs and also their location in the body will also be studied in-depthly. Diseases will, like treatment, will only mention the necessary things that will just help you begin or start the work with a lot of confidence, but more will be everything on control, on management using herbs. Everything is studied on in level 2. So have a blessed night rest, I believe. Yes, there is someone with a question. Yes, Mary.
I missed out on. You said the fibers can be grouped into two, and I only picked the dietary part. What was the second group?
About fibers.
Yeah.
So I said fibers can be either soluble or insoluble fibers.
Oh, that is a grouping.
Yeah, that is the grouping. But we said that fibers normally they're not it's not a single substance, but they're normally group of substances. They're normally groups of substances, of which we mentioned cellulose as one of the substance, hemicellulose, pectins, gums, mucilages, lignin as the substances that make up fiber. So we said when we were defining fiber, we said that fiber are groups of substances with similar characteristics. Groups of substances with similar characteristics. And then we mentioned those substances from cellulose to the sixth one, which was lignin. And we said that these particular substances, they can either be soluble or insoluble. That those that dissolve in water and can be fermented, and there are those that do not dissolve and they cannot be fermented, they cannot be broken down by the gut microbiota, or rather the good and the gut bacteria. I believe that answered your question.
Okay. I think I missed
Are
out on.
you are answered?
I think I missed out on that. Me, I picked one group as dietary and then the other one. Then when you talked of diet, from diet, you said whole nuts, whole fruits like that. I think I'd missed out on that. Sorry.
Oh, I think I'm going to confused you guys now, because what I was trying to say by that is fiber can be actually, from what we've said, it can be expanded in dietary fiber and
Oh.
functional fiber.
Oh.
Dietary fiber is what we've mentioned, what is found in food, the simple foods that you eat. But the functional fibers, these are extracts. They're extracted by pharmaceutical companies from the foods that you eat, so that you can use them as supplements.
Okay.
Did you get it?
Yeah, I think I've got it now.
Yeah, so I'm the one who somewhat confused you guys.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'm good.
Yeah, so functional are isolated, dietary, they're still in their parent source, and that is it. So yeah, I believe that everyone okay, what did I even want to say? It's okay. Have a blessed night, everyone, and see you tomorrow. We won't have a class because I'd really love to take us through the nutrition lecture. And tomorrow I committed to do some lecture on nutrition at one of the universities here in Nairobi. So you'll allow us do not really a recap, but a makeup class on Wednesday for tomorrow's class. Yeah, so have a blessed night, everyone. We can say a closing prayer. One of us can say a closing prayer. One person can just unmute and say a prayer.
Shall we pray? Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for your grace that has been able to see us through the lecture that we had. Thank you for all that we have learned, even through our facilitator. May you help us be able to internalize and understand this message, that we may be able to apply it first in our lives, our families, and to the rest who will be dealing with. As we disperse, Lord, we pray that your grace will abide, that you'll grant us a peaceful night, that, Lord, you'll cover us with your precious blood in a mighty way and protect us from the snares of the evil one. Help us be able to continue learning more from you and even prepare us even for the next lesson. And may your will prevail in our lives now and forevermore is our humble supplication.